Hello, my name is Tom McGrath, and I serve as the manager of charter grants for the Tennessee Department of Education. This session is designed to help your school successfully complete the funding application, which is the first step in accessing your grant funds. Once your funding application is approved, you'll be ready to begin requesting reimbursements for eligible expenses. This webinar will provide an overview of how the funding application connects to the annual grant life cycle. It'll review the ePlan user setup you'll need and the general workflow of the funding application. The bulk of our training today will be a full walkthrough of how to complete the funding application in ePlan. We'll first talk about the life cycle for all state grants to give you context for your funding application. All charter school grants are administered by fiscal year, which runs from July 1 to June 30. All grants follow the same cycle, and this cycle repeats for each year of the grant period of performance. There are three stages to the grant life cycle. One, the funding application. Schools complete a funding application or budgets that must be approved by the TDOE team before your school can receive grant funds. Two, reimbursement requests. Once your funding application is approved, schools can begin submitting reimbursement requests for allowable costs that occurred within the grant period. Only costs approved in your funding application are eligible for reimbursement. Three, final expenditure report, or FER. At the end of the fiscal year, all schools with an active grant complete a FER to account for grant spending and close out participation for that fiscal year. Each school must complete a FER for each active grant, even if all funds have been expended. In this webinar, we are focusing on the funding application, but please see your grants recipient guide and other resources on the Charter Grants website for assistance with reimbursements and FERs. We'll now talk about the ePlan users you'll need and the general workflow of completing your funding application. ePlan is Tennessee's online grants management system, which is used to apply for federal funding, request reimbursements, process budget amendments, and submit plans and reports. Users need the correct role to add information to ePlan or access information for their school. Users submit a user access form to request a user account and specific roles. Users with existing ePlan access may check which personnel are assigned each user access role in ePlan from the left navigation menu by selecting Address Book, then scrolling to the role. At least 2 different users are required to ensure appropriate internal controls. New ePlan users and existing ePlan users who need additional user access roles must request those roles using the ePlan user access form for charter schools. This form is available in ePlan on the homepage or TDOE resources in the folder titled User Access Forms. Email completed forms to eplan.help@tn.gov to add or remove users. Below are the roles and the order of the workflow steps for a typical application process. After each status change, ePlan automatically sends a notification email to all users who have the ePlan role of the next step in the process. As you can see from this workflow, each funding application goes through a series of internal approvals within your school and then a TDOE approval before your funding application is fully approved. In preparation for completing your school's funding application, it's critical that you add appropriate users for each step of this workflow. The 3 core roles that must be filled are the 3 at the top of the chart. LEA Grant Director. This title shifts to fit your specific grant. The LEA Fiscal Representative, and the LEA Authorized Representative. One contact can serve more than one role. For example, the LEA Grant Director and the LEA Authorized Representative may be the same contact, but to ensure appropriate internal controls within your school, at least 2 different staff members should be listed as approvers. We're now going to walk through the steps to completing your funding application. For additional guidance, including around grant allowability, please see your grants recipient guide posted to the Charter School Grant Opportunities webpage. The funding application should be completed no later than November 1st of the current fiscal year. Budgets must align with allowable costs. See your grant's specific recipient guide for detailed allowability guidance. Revisions from the initial grant application may be needed before the budget can be approved. To clarify, just because your initial grant application was approved doesn't mean that everything in that application's budget narrative is approved. Your planned expenditures still need TDOE review and approval to verify allowability. For users with ePlan roles for multiple organizations, make sure to select the correct organization on the ePlan homepage before proceeding. If you work with more than one school, be sure to select the correct school before beginning. To access the application, you'll first hover over the Funding tab on the left menu bar, then select Funding Applications. Select the desired state fiscal year from the dropdown. For example, 2026 indicates the 25-26 school year. Click on the application name to access the application. The cohort is designated by the fiscal year in which the award was made. Please note, you will need to complete a separate funding application for each grant that you receive. To begin the application, click on Draft Started, then click Confirm on the next page. Please note, this is a common area to forget because it does allow you to navigate to other pages in your funding application and accidentally miss Draft Started. Starting the draft is what allows you to edit and save changes in your funding application. Once you've started your draft, the Sections page is the main hub where you can access each part of the funding application. We'll review these sections and what needs to be completed in each one together now. We will go quickly through the first 3, but you can find more detailed guidance in your grants recipient guide. First, the history log. The history log contains a record of status changes and comments made on the application. Second, create comments. You can add comments to the history log in this section. Any comments created and saved in an ePlan funding application will always be available as a part of the funding application's history log. Generally speaking, I would recommend either emailing or calling us directly rather than communicating through ePlan so that we can be more responsive to your questions. My email and phone number are on the last slide of this presentation. One more section here to quickly discuss before we dive into the full walkthrough: allocations. In the allocations section, you can view the total amount awarded by the grant program to the grantee. For competitive grants, this page will not typically be populated until grant awards are made. As we begin diving into the other sections of the funding application in more detail, let's pause for one quick navigation best practice. To ensure that your work is saved and to be able to efficiently access other parts of the application, the best practice after completing a section is to click Save and Go To. and then sections. This will save your work and return you to the sections homepage of your funding application. The first section you'll need to complete in the funding application is the cover page. The cover page requires entry of general organization information. For federal funding applications like the CSP, this page also requires the unique entity identifier set up at sam.gov. The next section you'll need to complete is the budget. This is the most substantial section. The budget page must be completed to properly allocate the grant award to allowable budget categories. All budgeted expenses should be associated with the most specific line items. For example, if there is a more specific line item possible, such as textbooks, include any budgeted expenses for student textbooks in that category rather than a broader category like instructional materials. Users can make changes to grant budgets by adding budget details manually, copying a previous year's budget detail, and uploading budget data. For schools that have previously completed a funding application under a grant, ePlan allows you to copy and then revise your previous fiscal year's funding application. The next few slides, though, focus on schools that need to manually add budget details, which is all schools that are completing their first funding application under a grant. For each budget line that the organization plans to use, click Modify to the left of the account number to open the budget detail page for that line item. These account numbers or categories vary by grant, but your individual line items will fall within one of these account numbers or categories. To add a line item to an account number, click Add Budget Detail in the left corner. You'll repeat this step for each additional line item that you would like to add to an account number or category. The drop-down menu on this page shows all allowable line items for your grants in that account number or category. Choose the line item that is most appropriate for your planned expenditure. You may find that more than one line item seems to align with your expenditure. Use your judgment to select the most specific line item that matches your expenditure, and we will let you know in the revision process if any changes need to be made. Enter the quantity and cost for the budget detail. The quantity is most commonly 1.00. Listing a quantity of 1 is often the simplest way of condensing a number of purchases within one line item. Keep this in mind as we look at an example on the next slide. For each line item, you'll add a narrative description for all planned purchases within that line item. Descriptions should be detailed enough for reviewers to determine allowability and verify that the cost is reasonable. Narrative should generally include the type of the item, the number purchased, and the cost per unit. Contracted services should specify whom the contract is with, what services will be provided, and estimated service dates. Each budget line item should only appear once, and you should break out all expenses associated with the same line item in detail. For example here, calculators and smartboards are both 722 regular instruction equipment. So both are included in the same line item with a detailed breakdown. Also notice that for simplicity, this example uses the quantity of 1 with the total cost of all the purchases in this line item. Once all budget details are complete, confirm that the amount remaining is $0. ePlan auto calculates the budget totals as budget details are entered, and deducts the budgeted amounts from the awarded allocation. The next section that you may want to reference is the budget overview. Every funding application will have a standard budget overview page that shows a summary of the proposed allocations by line item number. The Show Unbudgeted Categories link will show every line item that is available to budget, which can be useful if you are trying to explore all the potential line items available under the grant that you may not have added yet. The final section you'll need to complete is the Related Documents section for your specific grant. Grant assurances to be signed and uploaded are found in the Related Documents section. Users must review all program assurances thoroughly. All items specified are requirements of the program, legislation, or regulation. By attaching the signed assurances, the user assures that they meet each of the conditions detailed in the assurances. To submit the application for review, the user changes the application status on the sections page to draft completed. Upon submission, users may see items marked with warning or error. Warnings may not need to be addressed, but all errors must be corrected before the application can be submitted. ePlan prompts users to view any warning or error messages if there are any submission issues. Once a funding application is in draft completed, it then moves through your school's required approvals. Your fiscal representative is automatically emailed that they need to approve the funding application. Once they approve, your authorized representative is automatically emailed that they also need to approve the funding application. After your school's ePlan contacts have approved, it then moves to the TDOE for review. If approved by TDOE, your school can begin requesting reimbursements. If there are any revisions that are needed, the TDOE will email you details of required corrections and return your funding application to you. You can then click Draft Started again and revise your saved funding application to make corrections. While the TDOE may require revisions, your school may also want to make revisions as the year goes on and your needs change. You may want to add an additional expense, or you may exceed your planned line item expense by ePlan's maximum of 10%. You can place your funding application back in Draft Started at any time, which will then reopen the budget and narrative text boxes for user entry to make changes. This ePlan workflow of approvals proceeds the exact same way as your initial funding application. Once approved by the TDOE again, you'll be able to submit reimbursements again using a revised budget. Thank you for visiting this webinar. Hopefully you can now confidently complete your funding application in ePlan. If you have any questions about this material, please email or call me using the contact information on the screen. I'd be happy to assist.